Hi, welcome to City Vision University's Prior Learning Assessment Portfolio Development course. This lesson is going to be focusing on an overview for the course. In every course you take, there's going to be course outcomes, and they describe what you should be able to do by the end of the course. So at the end of this course, you should be able to recognize and describe the role of prior learning assessment in achieving your unique educational goals and those of adult learners in general. Now, part of what you should recognize in this course is if you just did a prior learning assessment portfolio, then you might get credit for the courses that you're awarded in that portfolio. But in this course itself, it's not just to develop a portfolio, it's to learn the theory behind it also. So that's what you're getting credit for. So you're going to be identifying specific areas of competency which you've acquired through life experiences, both formal and informal. You're going to evaluate and choose specific college courses that align with college level learning and competencies. You're going to identify and collect various forms of documentation that verify your learning competencies. You're going to write a learning narrative that demonstrates the context and nature of your learning using a model called Kolb's model of experiential learning. And you're going to develop and organize a learning portfolio using the appropriate formatting and technology. So the required course is, or the required book for this course is what's called Earn College Credit for What You Know. It's by this group called CAEL, and they establish all the standards. So this book corresponds to all the standards of CAEL that our accreditor requires. So this is the student book. There's a faculty book, and then there's an administrator book. You can get this book either as an ebook or a paperback. It's really important to read this book in this course, probably much more than in other courses. I've seen students try to submit portfolios without doing this, and it doesn't go well. So be sure you read through this book each week. It's not that much reading. So the outline, week 1 is just going to give you an introduction to prior learning assessment portfolio process, and you're going to have an assignment focused on your educational goals. Then in week 2, we're going to talk about learning theory, and then what you're going to do is provide an extended resume and learning autobiography. Then in week 3, you're going to do a learning inventory and identify potential course objectives and syllabi. And so in week 4, as you're doing this first draft, the way this is going to work is week 4, and what I found whenever I worked with students, because I used to teach this course as the grading instructor, almost no one gets their portfolio right the first time. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you iterate it. So if you do well, you might get it right the second or third time. So we're going to have you revise it. And that's what you're going to do in week 5. In week 6, you might add additional portfolios. So say you want to get credit for a 3-credit course. Week 5 would be where you're revising that first 3-credit course. And then in week 6, you might add a second 3-credit course. Now, if your students can get up to 30 credits for undergrad or 9 credits for graduate, basically 25% of your degree, that's going to take a lot of work to get all those credits. So, and a lot of the work will just be, writing for these. So, and then in week 7 would be a second. This is essentially your rough draft of your final prior learning assessment portfolio. And week 8 is your prior learning assessment portfolio. So let me give you the big picture on prior learning portfolio assessment. So prior learning portfolio assessment falls into an overall category called prior learning. So things like AP test or other types of tests that you might take, CLEP test or things along those lines. Those are other forms of prior learning, and this is another form. So it's really intended for adults so why accreditors allow the prior learning assessment portfolio process to exist is because they recognize that sometimes, especially for older adults, a transcript, the whole idea behind a transcript is it should be an accurate reflection of what you've learned related to academic topics. But for a lot of adults, they've learned a lot of things. I've encountered executive directors of, $10, $20 million nonprofits or rescue missions that don't even have a bachelor's, or people who've run restaurants, multi-million-dollar restaurants, and they don't have college credits to show for that, but they did do the learning. So, and that's really what this is about. It's about correcting to show where you've done learning that would be the equivalent of college credit. So with City Vision, the average age of our student is 40. We'll often have many students with a lot of experience, especially in nonprofit and ministries, and no credential to show for that. So the other thing to recognize in the big picture is there is a giant chain of accountability in accreditation. So it goes U.S. Department of Education down to accreditors. The accreditors use something called the CAEL process, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. They're the people who publish your book. And we have to follow very specific standards. So one way of thinking about accreditors is that they're very similar to accountants in that they want to show a paper trail of documentation that follows all the standards. So, and as you're preparing things, think like you're trying to satisfy essentially an accountant. And so recognize that some of the key standards are that you can't receive more than 25% of your degree through a prior learning assessment, and that is combined with other forms of prior learning assessment. So, for example, if you had some AP or CLEP test or ACE credit, then that in total can only be 25% of your degree. So that's 30 credits for a bachelor's, 15 credits for an associate's, and 9 credits for a 36 credit MBA. So the way that works is you get 3 credits for this course, plus any additional credits that you get after your portfolio is evaluated. So the instructor for this course will evaluate your portfolio. So as I mentioned, our accreditor uses these standards that are called CAEL Standards. And there is the instructor guidebook that follows these. So that's assessing student portfolios for college credit, and your instructor's been through that. And then there's the institutional standards that we use as an institution. So just to give you a quick overview of what these standards are, and as you're designing your portfolio, it can be helpful to keep these in mind. So the credit is only awarded for evidence of learning, not for experience or time spent. So you can say, I was an accountant for 10 years. Well, we can't just say, well, you get credit for that. You have to demonstrate that you mastered, the topic specifically related to that. So assessment is in this whole process is not just to prove that you learned something. We want you to learn in this process. And we have criteria for outcomes that are clearly articulated. So you're going to be working with course outcomes. And one of the constraints that we're under is we can only award credit if we have a subject matter expert that can review that credit. So currently, Ken Dr. Heitland will evaluate. He can evaluate a lot of nonprofit management, a lot of business, a lot of general education, and some ministry credit. And then we have our addiction counseling chair that can cover that. But we had someone who was wanting to get credit for being able to speak Arabic, and we don't have anyone on our faculty that can test that can assess, do you speak Arabic effectively? So we weren't able to award that credit. The whole goal is to be more equitable in this process. That's what number 5 is about. Number 6, we try to provide a lot of guidance for you in this process. Number 7, we have clear policies and procedures. You'll see our handbook. We provide fees. So the way the fees work, your fees is a one-time fee. It's not based on the number of credits that we award to you. That would kind of create a perverse system where the institution wants to give you as many credits as possible, because then they're going to charge you more for those. And the other thing is that whoever's doing the assessment has to have training in this, and that they're monitored by our staff. Now, you always want to understand what you're being graded by, and that is this portfolio assessment rubric. So a rubric is just a guide to grading. Now, this can look very busy because you have all these different columns. The column you want to focus on is the column for 4. That is essentially getting an A And in some categories, if you don't have a 4, you're not going to get credit. So if you don't have 4 on communication, you could probably get credit. But if I were grading this and you didn't have a 4, then I probably wouldn't grant you credit if it was in the course outcomes. So the first category is course outcomes identified and addressed. So we're going to have you find a course that's comparable to what you learned, and then there's going to be outcomes. And you need to be able to demonstrate that you met those. Then you need to show that that you learn from those experiences, and you're able to distinguish between the experience and the learning that comes from that experience. So you could say, I was a bookkeeper for 2 years at a organization. Well, you need to be able to explain, because of that, you understand a profit and loss, you understand journal entries, you need to be able to explain the learning that actually happened from that. You're able to cite broader theoretical or conceptual links. So again, using the bookkeeper or accounting, it's not enough and there's, one guy that I graded on an accounting course, and in his case, he, was explaining that he had, balanced the books at a restaurant that he had managed for many years, but I had to require that he actually use the right terminology in explaining that. So you need to be able to explain how theory relates to your own experience. So that's this next one. You need to be able to show that what you learned you could apply into other context, and how you could transfer it into other environments. This one, communication, is that you are essentially writing effectively, and that you're communicating effectively with minimal errors. And then this bottom one, supporting documentation, you explain, if you provide a lot of documentation, that you explain in your narrative the purpose of the documentation and how it relates. So as you're going through, and we'll come back to this, you want to keep these in mind. And you can look at what 3s would be and what 2s would be. But for the most part, if you're wanting to get, you should be focused on trying to get a 4. If you're wanting to get credit. So now some of you are coming through one of our partners. Now, if you're coming through a CityVision credit partner, you don't need to complete prior learning portfolio to receive credit from that partner. Now, you may have other credit. So you just need to have a transcript sent to us, and your credit partner credit does not count towards your prior learning limit. So that's a limit of 25%. It counts as transfer credit, which at the undergraduate, it's a 75% limit of the degree. At the graduate, it's 25%. So on our website, we have this partner section. And then if you go to how do we partner and a list of partners, you can see who our various credit partners are. So the most common to come through this course are those from TUMI, the Urban Ministry Institute, or Wheeler Mission. So it used to be we required them that they had to go through our prior learning assessment process, but we no longer need to do that. Now, there are several things that I want to go through and review with you: our prior learning handbook, a sample portfolio, a portfolio template, and I also want to cover the writing format. So I'm going to do that next. So starting off with the template. So each week you're going to be completing a portion of this template. So the highlighted sections you'll want to fill out. And then in week 1, you're going to be writing your educational goals as an assignment. And then in week 2, you're going to be doing items 2 and 3. So your extended resume, your learning experiences, autobiography. And then in week 4 is where you're going to actually start the learning narratives for each course. So, and then you'll combine those together. And in the end, you need to be following the guidelines for what's called APA citation format. And let me just show you how you can find that. So you go to our course introduction lesson, and then you scroll down to section 4, and you should be sure to read this course introduction. It's really important. And then actually in section 5, you'll see review writing and forum requirements. So in this course, we are going to be requiring that you do this papers and projects for ministry courses, and even though this isn't a ministry course, we're using this format. So what that means is you need to use APA in-text citations. You can click on this to see what that means. You can use this tool to create citations automatically. And then you need to have a references list following APA at the end of the paper. And then the other things that we have, so we have a prior learning handbook. That's required reading for this week. It's really important. It is basically like your instructions for the whole course. So please read through this. We go a little more in detail on some of the CAEL standards, but a lot of the questions that you might have will be in this. It's only 10 pages, so read through that. And then the last part is we have a sample portfolio. Now, this was by a guy who he got a lot of credit, Jeffrey Cook. He's at Springs Rescue Mission. He gave us permission to use this. And he had been a restaurant manager for several multi-million-dollar restaurants. And through that, he got a lot of credit. So he got a credit for human resources, financial planning, for food services, restaurant management, and coaching. And you can see this is a pretty long portfolio. It can seem kind of overwhelming if you actually look at how many pages it is, but most of that was appendix, just so you realize. But it ended up being like 78 pages. So, and you may say, wow, a 78-page paper, that's really long. Well, it's a lot shorter than, in this case, he ended up getting 15 credits for this. So it's a lot less work than taking 5 courses. So, in his case, we usually say that the prior learning portfolio should be 3 to 10 pages. So this one's 9 pages. This one is, a little longer than that. And this one was, shorter. And then he also provided a lot of backup documentation. So as you go through each week, and I would encourage you this week is to look at what he wrote for his educational goals as a model to learn from. And then you can also look at his resume and his learning autobiography. And it's not an autobiography. We don't want to just know your life story. We want to know your learning life story. That's the purpose of this, is for this. So, and you'll be doing that in a later week. So if you have any questions, please ask your faculty member. Thanks a lot.